Good evening and welcome to the latest edition of the Sportsballers podcast. My name is Eric. I'm here with Corey and Evan as always. It is wrapping up Championship Sunday week for us. We've got 2 weeks until the Super Bowl, so we'll mostly be focusing on what happened last week and some other news around the NFL. We've also got some baseball information to disclose, but as normal, it's my week, so we'll get a little state of the NBA action going on. Got a lot of information to get through because the season's been going on for a little over a month now, about 5 weeks, and a lot of things have happened. We've had a little bit of a shift in expectations in the Eastern Conference, so I guess we'll start there at the top. The Philadelphia 76ers are kind of living up to the expectations we had for them last year in a different way. Joel Embiid, as of right now, looks like one of the favorites, at least, to win the MVP. Of course, we're only a handful of games in here, but the moves that they made in the offseason to add some shooting, adding Seth Curry and Danny Green, looks like they've paid off. Their defensive integrity is still strong. The fit of Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid is still a concern, which could potentially hold them back and limit their ceiling. But I'm curious to see what they do with Simmons because as of right now, they're probably one more high-caliber offensive player away from being a real threat to win the whole thing. And Simmons has continued to not be able to shoot the basketball. Like, he provides good value in the offense in the transition game. He's a tremendous defensive player, but they need him to provide some type of scoring punch, and it's just not there, and it doesn't look like it ever will be there. So I just don't know how long his future is going to last in Philadelphia. He might be a trade piece, probably not this season, but at some point in the offseason, if the Sixers feel like they're one move away from serious contention, then he could be shipped out of town. But as of right now, the Sixers look really good. A very legitimate threat to win the East as of right now. They have the ability, the versatility to guard the better teams. They can guard the Nets to some extent. They can play defense against the Bucks. I think that they're in really good shape right now, and they should be happy with the development of their young center. He's really turning into a terrific basketball player. So moving on to the Brooklyn Nets, who have gotten a lot of play on this podcast recently, specifically because of the James Harden trade that happened just a couple weeks ago. And the results so far have been kind of what we expected, a little bit mixed. They score a lot of points. It's hard to stop them, but they traded away most of their depth, and their defense is horrible. They got swept in a back-to-back against the Cleveland Cavaliers, which should never happen to anybody, professional or otherwise. That's just an embarrassing situation. But they bounced back, and they were able to win 2 straight against the Heat. And granted, the Heat are missing 2 starters. They're missing Jimmy Butler and Tyler Hero. So that's not really great wins, but it's a hell of a lot better than losing to the Cavs. So there's something to be said for that. I worry about this team. I don't think that they've got the defensive quality to be able to get enough stops. We've seen that in the games that they've played. And there's only so good the offense can get. Frankly, I feel like Kyrie Irving might be the odd man out here. And since he's such a character, I guess we'll use that word to describe him, he might find himself on the trade block if they can't shore up their defense, which I don't think they will. But my question is, at this point, given Kyrie Irving's transgressions, how tradable is he? I mean, he's clearly a malcontent. He basically said, I need a pause after playing 2 weeks worth of basketball games. I mean, does anybody really want to fork over really valuable players to make the Nets better just so they get him in return? I question that.
I feel like that would be a very poor decision by any team who would do that. And I can't think of a team. I can't even think of, like, as you know, I don't follow the NBA as closely as you do, so obviously I'm not going to think of a team off the top of my head who would do it, but I can't even think of what type of a team would do that to be like, here, Eric, this is the kind of team who would make this trade, and then you can tell me which of the 30 NBA teams fits that recipe. I can't even tell you that because I just can't imagine anybody wanting to trade anything valuable enough for the Nets to go through with it to get him. You're not going to trade him if you're some terrible team who just wants somebody exciting to put people in the arena, because you're going to have to trade whatever potentially good assets you have. You're not going to do that.
People in the arena right now.
Right, that's the point.
You
can't. It can't even be a butts and seats move because there are no butts in the seats.
But even if that wasn't the case, even if you could have people in the arena, you're not going to trade anything valuable for him. If you're a team who is a star away from being an NBA title contender, this is not the star that you go after and you trade pieces away for. So I think the Nets are stuck with him.
Yeah, I mean the Nets need depth to help them win. They can't just trade Kyrie Irving for draft picks, right? That's not going to help them. They need front court pieces to help shore up the back end of their defense to make it somewhat manageable, that maybe they could get some stops. But like you said, Corey, teams that are in contention, they value those pieces as well. People like having second or third big men coming off the bench to help play defense in certain situations, to give them some depth, to provide some minutes, to provide them some quality in the second unit, to prevent that from becoming a sieve. Teams are not going to be willing to give those guys up. Their realistic hope is maybe in the buyout market when that happens, but again, you're probably not going to get anybody that good if you're buying out their contract, because most people in the buyout market are guys that were older veterans that got paid by a crummy team, which means that they're probably just older veterans who aren't that good anymore. Otherwise, they would be making their team good. And that's not the case for most people in the buyout market. So I'm interested to see what they do. As currently constructed, they're not winning a championship. As far as I'm concerned, they'd be lucky to make it to the conference finals, depending on how the bracket shakes out. Because if they have to go up against a fully healthy Heat team, or the Celtics as of right now, they're in trouble. Because I don't see them stopping Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum. And there are better players that they're going to have to stop later down the road if they want to win a championship, and I just don't see that happening.
Are they top 4 in the East?
Yeah, they're top 4. Yeah.
Okay.
They're going to win plenty of games by virtue of they're just going to score so many points, and at some point the other team's going to miss some shots. But it's just a matter of every night's going to have to seem like a track meet unless the other team has a bad night. And if you're relying on teams to have bad nights in the playoffs in order for you to win, you're not going to win. Like, you have to outplay them. You can't afford to just hope that they have off nights. That might happen one time, but it's not going to happen 4 times in 7 nights.
Sure.
What I don't understand is, why are the Nets surprised that this team that they've constructed isn't as good as they had hoped? Like, what did they expect? Did they think James Harden was going to play defense for the first time in his life? Did they think that Kyrie Irving wasn't going to be a clown who thinks the earth is flat? Like, what did they think was going to happen? Like, I could have told you 2 years ago this wasn't going to work, and it doesn't seem to be working. Like, oh, what do we do? Like, you signed up for this fully and willingly, just dove into the Kyrie Irving experience. Like, I'm not surprised. Like, yeah, they're not playing any defense. Yeah, we have to win 140 to 138 every night because, we only play half court.
Yeah, I don't know if this was a move that they made because they saw the Kyrie Irving experience going off the rails. And so if they needed to get rid of him, they would have James Harden in as the backup option. Because, I mean, if you've got Harden and KD, and like I said, if they can build something around them that resembles a defensive team, this team's going to be able to win and contend. But the idea is you have to get rid of one of their 3 stars, and obviously Kyrie Irving would have to be the one to go. You can't trade James Harden because you just gave away the farm to get him.
Why did they trade for James Harden then?
Again, probably because...
Did anybody make them do that?
I don't know. It's a good question. It really is a good question, because if it was because they're worried that Kyrie is going to be too combustible, then frankly, it doesn't make
a fire extinguisher and a one-way train ticket out of town.
Right. Like, you can figure that out later. if that happens. But trading away all of your assets for James Harden, it didn't seem wise. I thought that the team that they had before they traded for Harden was more of a threat to win the title than the team they have now. And they've also put themselves in a position where this is a 2-year window to do this. Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and James Harden could all walk after the 2022 season. So you've got 2 years to win a championship with a bunch of guys that don't play defense, hoping that they'll just kind of figure it out on the fly. That doesn't usually work.
And ridiculous.
And you've got other teams out there. It's not like it's just, the Nets just have to figure out how to play basketball right and they'll win. No, you still have to go through really good teams. There is no certainty in beating the Bucks or the Celtics or the Sixers, or if they get there, the Lakers or the Clippers. Like, those teams are really good too. I mean, those are good teams that could beat them even if they try hard on defense. So it seems like the Nets have kind of pulled what they did a little bit back in 2013 when they traded all of their picks to the Celtics for a washed-up Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce. Now, obviously, James Harden is a much better player at this point in his career than those guys were, but he's not necessarily a great fit with Kyrie Irving because, Harden's kind of relegated himself to the point guard role, which I think he can play. But, again, it goes back to defense. You've got 3 guys out there that aren't great defenders in Durant, Harden, and Irving. KD can play some defense, but he's not going to go out there and be a rim protector or anything like that. And the other 2 guys are traffic cones. So you're just a mess. I mean, it's just a mess on the back end of their defense, and I don't see it getting any better unless they can pull some miracle off and make some trade and fleece somebody out of their big men that can go and protect the rim. I don't see this ending with any type of parade in Brooklyn.
All right.
So moving on to other teams in the East, the Milwaukee Bucks look about the same. Teams are employing similar defensive strategies against Giannis, forcing him to shoot. It's going not that great. He's obviously not a very good outside shooter, probably never will be. And you wonder a little bit sometimes if they've possibly misused him, which sounds insane because he's the 2-time MVP. But playing him 15 feet and out when he can't shoot and when he drives to the basket in such a reckless situation leads to extra turnovers, and they struggle to create offense against teams with defensive integrity. So I worry a little bit about their strategy. I wish that the Bucks would have gotten somebody that they could really hand the reins to as the lead guard and made Giannis sort of the guy that plays off of the quality point guard or quality wing type of player instead of having Giannis be the initiator of the offense. I still think that that's a mistake. I think that Giannis is better suited playing more like an Anthony Davis type of role where he's not expected to have the ball in his hands and make everything happen on offense, but he can be the guy that the elite wing player defers to, like LeBron can defer to Anthony Davis at certain times, or he can use him in certain actions that unlock his potential as a rim runner, but that doesn't happen for Milwaukee, so I'm not really sure what the strategy is there. I mean, they've got a longer window than most teams because Giannis is so young, and they've got him locked up. But I think the move that they need to make to get to contention at some point is to find a legitimate, star guard. Now, Drew Holiday is good, and Chris Middleton is good, but those guys can't be the initiator on a championship offense, in my opinion. So I mentioned the Celtics. They look really good so far. They're young players. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are both playing at an all-star level. Jaylen Brown's scoring average is up like 7 points per game. He's up to 27 a game. His true shooting percentage has jumped 4%, which is a huge jump. He went from good to great in that regards. I mean, through the first 16 games, he's been better than Jason Tatum, and Jason Tatum's really good. Now, do I expect that to be the norm? Probably not. I think Jason Tatum still has a higher ceiling. But it's not like Jason Tatum's playing poorly. He's playing better than he did last year, too, and he was really good. So I think that the Celtics could be a real threat this year. It seems like every year they're one piece short. They don't have that star, but if these guys keep playing like this, they could be the stars that they hope them to be and develop them into some type of championship contender. So I'm excited to watch them because it's been years and years and years waiting for the Celtics to finally pop. And is that this year? I can't say it's not. And normally after 20 games, I'd be able to say, Celtics look like they're going to go out in the second round again. So,
yes, years and years and years. All these Boston fans, they've been starved for what's been 18 months since their last championship or something.
I'm speaking more towards the contemporary Celtics. I understand that the city of Boston has had plenty of success, and I don't feel bad for them. If the worst thing about your city is that your basketball team isn't quite great, but it's still really fun to watch and good, then sorry, don't care.
It's been 2 years exactly. The Pacers won Super Bowl 53.
Yep. So speaking of bad basketballs, the local establishment, the Washington Wizards, suck. They played the Rockets last night.
I don't get it. They're doing the same thing the Nets are doing, right? So they're playing no defense. Like that should make them one of the top 4 teams in the Eastern Conference.
It doesn't help that one of their leading scorers has only as many points as he does total shots, which is not good.
Especially when shots are worth 2 or 3.
Yes, that's not very good efficiency. Because if you think about it logically, those are just field goal attempts. Those don't even include the times he gets to the free throw line. So those are extra possessions that aren't even rolled into that. And then you have to factor in turnovers. So the efficiency there is awful. Like if you look at true shooting percentage, which incorporates those scoring possessions that are spent at the free throw line instead of taking a field goal attempt, his is like 45%, which is about 10% worse than the league average. So that's abysmal. It's hard to win that way. I mean, even with Bradley Beal leading the league in scoring, and Bradley Beal's scoring efficiency is quite good, especially for a guy that shoots as much as he does. But when you've got an inefficient teammate that plays no defense, and the rest of your team plays no defense, you end up 3-10, and you end up holding your head, and like you have a migraine after your team's getting their ass kicked by the Houston Rockets, who you traded your former franchise player to for Russell Westbrook. Not a good scene for Washington. I got to assume Bradley Beal is getting moved probably before the trade deadline. He's got a lot of value to a lot of teams that are looking to win championships and contend. He's young. He's in his prime. But he's of no use to the Wizards, and the Wizards are certainly of no use to him because there's no point in being stuck on a crappy team when you're at your peak and other teams have a ton of interest in you. The Wizards look like they're going to end up with a top 3 pick this year. They could easily roll the dice and trade Beal to somebody else and get another draft pick in a pretty loaded draft and just hit the reset button on this whole thing because this isn't working.
Again, do they expect this to work? Like, you shuffle around the deck chairs on the Titanic and be like, oh, well, we're going to make it to New York now. We're all good. Like, no.
Yeah,
they're going down. They're not even going to get to 9-20. They're 3-10.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
You're lucky to get to 9-20 if they get to play 29 games, right?
Yeah,
that's they took 3 weeks off for coronavirus.
Yeah, that's the thing is because I actually have some interest in watching the Wizards, even though they suck, because they've got interesting players like Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal. Like Russell Westbrook's not playing well, but it's still interesting to watch what he does and see why it's not going well. Like he's still compelling on the screen, and obviously Bradley Beal is as well. But I haven't even been able to know when the hell they're playing because they took a 3-week sabbatical dealing with coronavirus. So, like the schedule's all jumbled up. I'm like, oh right, the Wizards are playing. I forgot that's a thing. So that's annoying. But now they seem to be backed into just right into form, losing a bunch of games to bad teams. I'll get back on track and start tracking the Wizards a little more closely. So moving on to the Western Conference, the Lakers and the Clippers look great. A little bit of a surprise there for the Lakers, given the fact that they won the title in the bubble just 5 minutes ago. And yet they've got the best record in the Western Conference to start the season. I think might be the best record in the NBA. LeBron's playing great. Anthony Davis is on point. It really looks like the additions that they made to their team, which I kind of predicted would work, have worked with aplomb. I mean, their bench is awesome. Dennis Schroeder has definitely etched out a role as a secondary creator for that team. They look like they're the real deal. I wouldn't want to play them at any point in the playoffs. They look like they're absolutely the title contender and favorite that I thought they would be. And I don't think anything's changed there. As for the Clippers, again, it's hard to it's hard to look at the Clippers with a whole lot of optimism, given the fact that we know they can look awesome, but they didn't look so awesome when they had to last year, specifically in the playoffs, and specifically one playoff P. So the regular season, they kind of feel like a little bit like the Washington Capitals used to, where they can show me all they want in January and February. What's going to happen in May? And that still remains to be seen. But I still think that they're probably the second most talented. They have the second best roster in the Western Conference. I don't think they're going to beat the Lakers, but if they get upset again by somebody like the Nuggets in the second round, they're going to have to blow this thing up.
Last year, the playoffs were in August and September.
Yep.
And they still didn't win.
Nope.
So time of year isn't relevant.
Yeah, but the time of year in terms of the stakes of the games is relevant.
Mm-hmm. And they don't win much.
Not historically, no. They've never been to a conference final. So an interesting wrinkle in the Western Conference is that the Utah Jazz look awesome too. They're right up there with the Lakers and the Clippers, with boasting one of the best records in the league. They've really impressed as a team because I know that people talk about Donovan Mitchell as an emerging star, but his numbers don't look that much better than they used to. It's that the rest of the players are getting involved. Mike Conley, who they acquired from the Grizzlies last year, who did absolutely nothing for them, has come out and become a very valued commodity for them. And they've increased their bench depth. Rudy Gobert, who you guys know
the world
the wrong reasons, is actually a pretty good basketball player, didn't you know?
That's not what he's going to go down in history
no,
for being.
His obituary is going to feature something less than great basketball player. It's going to feature something like,
at least not first,
cause sports to end in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, he is good, and that's all that matters now in terms of how the Jazz performed this year. So the Jazz have a lot of depth. They're well coached. They've got good talent. They seem to have – I think a lot of people underrate the value of having years of chemistry built in the NBA, especially with the way everybody changes teams all the time. These guys have been together for the last 4 or 5 years. Joe Ingles and Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, they have a chemistry to them, and they know how to operate in a way that puts them in position to win a lot of games. So I think that they could definitely be a tough out for anybody. If the Clippers have to face off against them in the second round, that could be hilarious. So I'm looking forward to that as a potential. Because, you guys know I don't like the Clippers. I'm not a big fan of a lot of the players, the way they operate, especially last year with the way they kind of acted like they were entitled to cruise to the Western Conference Finals, and then they didn't make it, and there was a whole bunch of finger pointing and whining. So if they have to go up against the Jazz, I don't know who I would pick at this point, but if the Jazz keep playing like this, I think they could send them out.
You mentioned,
I think it was Donovan Mitchell. Didn't he get a flagrant 2 and an ejection for hitting somebody in the man zone?
Yeah, that happened. Yep.
I knew Donovan Mitchell got called out, shall we say, by Shaquille O'Neal in the past week or so. And
that was ridiculous.
And that ultimately led to the Utah House of Representatives passing a resolution basically making Spida, his nickname, the official state arachnid.
They did some other crap too. I don't care about that. Like that's just so stupid.
I find it funny.
Although
official state arachnid.
So Shaq faced some criticism for being that guy because that was pretty. I thought that was a little out of line because I was actually watching the broadcast that night.
Yeah, you can't try and convince me that was your way of giving him a pep talk or motivation.
No.
Like that's not how you do that. You don't tell a guy I think you suck. What do you have to say about that? Because especially being a good basketball player isn't about being able to argue with you about how good I am. It's about what am I doing on the court.
Yeah, and leave the arguing to people like us unathletic clowns that get on Skype and talk about.
Hey, you speak for yourself. I'm plenty athletic.
Not compared to them.
I've
Fair enough.
backslid into unathletic. Got on the scale today, and it's a little more than what it was this time last year. Let's just say that.
Well, I'm moving in the right direction with that regards too, so I'm feeling pretty good there. But like Shaq kind of came out today and said something along the lines of, I'm allowed to do stuff like this because nobody in the league has done what I've done except for LeBron and Steph. Like those are the only guys that are as accomplished as me. Therefore, I'm allowed to talk that smack. And I'm like, but you're not in that role as, this isn't WWE.
Right.
You're not in the league now.
So you are a paid analyst. Your job is not to knock the players. Your job is to analyze them. So
I wouldn't want Jerry Rice going up and saying that about Justin Jefferson. It doesn't matter that Jerry Rice is way better and probably will be way better than Justin Jefferson will ever be. Almost certainly is. But I still would not want that.
Yeah, it would come across as tacky, and that's what it does when Shaq does this. But Shaq's gonna do what Shaq's gonna do. Okay, he's bigger than life. That's his personality. He's gotten a little salty in his older age, but if he wants to sit there and alienate himself with the players, because that's not a good look for TNT. Because again, Donovan Mitchell was only there because he was the player of the game in a game they had just beaten the Pelicans in. So what's going to happen to them when the next time some young player that has been, discussed on the show before has a huge game and he says, "Nah, I'm not going to go talk to Charles, Shaq, and Kenny. I'm just going to go to the locker room, have a nice night." That's bad for your brand.
Yeah, and I wouldn't blame a player for doing that at this point.
Not at all. So I think that's something that they can't just let go. I think that's something that's got to change, to be honest, for their sake. I don't care what they do. They're not paying me. So
this is the type of thing that really bothers me. These analysts get on TV and they're like, "Oh, these kids today, they don't know anything about anything. Back when I played, it was so much better, and I'm the greatest, and this and that and other." Like, you're not doing what you're being paid to do, right? You're beclowning yourself on television.
Yeah, and you're trashing the league that you're representing. Like that doesn't help increase interest in your league. That doesn't make kids want to watch it. If this is the worst brand of basketball ever, and you're saying that on TV, well, there goes my interest in watching these games.
Yeah, go watch something else.
And to your point, Corey, that's like I'm sure you've heard that a lot more than just this conversation. That a lot of people said this is the worst brand of NBA basketball ever, and that comes from a lot of older players, and that hurts the sport. I mean, that becomes treated as gospel.
We've talked about this exact same thing with baseball, for years now. Like this is one of the reasons that we think, at least, baseball doesn't really get a lot of traction with younger fans anymore, is because every time you turn on the radio or the TV and you're watching one of these broadcasts, these announcers are talking about how terrible the game is and how these young kids are coming in just ruining the sport by having too much fun. It's like, okay, but that's the kind of those are the things that are going to get young people interested. Like we want to see people our age playing well and having fun. And if we don't get to see that, well, we've got the NBA or we've got the NFL or we've got video games.
Yeah. Remember when Brandon Nimmo came up and he hit a home run and he was smiling a whole bunch? He got hit by a pitch in his next at-batter in the next game for smiling too much. This is a thing that happened in a Major League Baseball game on television. Unbelievable.
And there were people who were like, "Oh, well, I mean, he kind of deserved that. Like, he shouldn't be smiling so much. Like, just act like you've done this before. Just do your job." Yeah. What? Give me a break.
Let people have fun, man. Like, come on. It's crazy. So moving on to some other Western Conference squads. The Portland Trail Blazers, who got a lot of hype coming into the season because of the way Damian Lillard played in the bubble last year. They're having a pretty decent start record-wise to the season, but they're dealing with some injury issues. CJ McCollum he suffered an ankle injury that's going to put him out probably for another few more weeks. Yusuf Nurkic broke his wrist, and there seemed to be some
for basketball.
that there were some uncertain timelines for his return. So that's two starters and probably two top 50 players out of your lineup. And so that means you're relying on Carmelo Anthony for more minutes, and Melo's, old and not as good as he used to be, obviously. So they've got a little bit of tough sledding to go. I never bought them as a championship contender anyway. But I did think that they could finish with a pretty impressive regular season record. But that's looking like that might get shot to hell a little bit, unfortunately for them due to these injuries. But they should still make the playoffs. The Denver Nuggets, last year's surprise team in the bubble as far as how far they advanced, they've kind of started off a little sluggishly.
Well, they lost Jeremy Grant.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We discussed that during the season. Grant's playing great for the Pistons. He's averaging 24 points a game,
killing it.
Almost 7 rebounds a game. He's playing really good basketball. Unfortunately, he's stuck in Detroit, but also he made that choice, so he decided to get paid. So, and when you decide to get paid by a bad team, these things happen. But hey, but good for him for being productive. And the Nuggets seem to be riding the ship a little bit. Nikola Jokic is continuing to be incredible. I think he leads the NBA in assists as a center. I don't think that's been done since the days of Wilt Chamberlain. So that's pretty amazing. So props to him for that. But
I know that he's listed as a center, but does he? You watch more than I do. Does he play like a center? Because you don't see a lot of players play like a center these days. Like, basketball has become positionless. We've talked about this on this show. Every analyst talks about this ad nauseum. It's positionless now. So how is that really that big of a deal that he's leading the league in assists, quote unquote, as a center?
Well, it's difficult to say what is a traditional center versus what's the boundary here? Like, what would you consider not a center? Because he doesn't play on the block the entire game, like Wilt Chamberlain or Shaquille O'Neal would do.
Right, and I guess I don't know that I necessarily have an answer for you on what the boundary is. The point in me asking was more so how big of a deal is that really that he's leading as a center?
Well, these things are also arbitrary at times. So the fact that he's leading as a center, maybe it doesn't matter. It's more about how he's doing it by being such an incredible passer. I mean, he is the best passer in the NBA as a 7-foot dude that primarily plays in the post. So that's pretty amazing. That skill set hasn't been seen from somebody with that kind of size. Like, if you're going to ask me, does he play like a traditional Hakeem Olajuwon on the block type of center, I'm going to say no. He operates a lot out of the pick and roll in a two-man game where
I guess that was sort of the question that I was wondering, because if he's doing it out of the post mostly, then obviously that is really impressive, as opposed to if he's playing on the wing, he's beyond the arc, setting up the offense, running the offense. But if he's playing in the post a lot, that's not what you would expect. That's not where you would expect a lot of your assists to come from.
Well, sure, you got to be able to see the floor. But again, the fact that he still starts most possessions in the paint, he comes out to set a screen, usually catches the ball on the flare, and then he's able to distribute from there. But again, it's not so much the position that he plays, it's the fact that he can do and has the skills that he does at that size, because he can get in the paint and bang with people too. It's not like he just shoots jump shots or something like that. He'll get in the post and knock people around like a traditional big as well.
Does he have any triple doubles yet this season? Because he seems like the perfect he seems like the kind of guy who could potentially, have more triple doubles than Russell Westbrook if he wanted to.
I'm sure he has quite a few triple doubles. I don't know off the top of my head. He's averaging 25 points, 12 rebounds, and 9.3 assists per game. So almost averaging a triple double.
There you go.
Actually, now that I won't waste too much time doing this because I am curious. They usually have triple doubles listed on Basketball Reference, but it's always somewhere weird, so it's kind of hard to find.
Don't worry about it for right now, though.
Yeah,
I was more wondering, just because I've kind of known that he has the skill set to get triple doubles. I wasn't sure if he's the guy who's going to get them all the time, but he's a good passer, he's a good rebounder. He can get in there and and get physical. He can score.
Yeah, he's an all-around player. He can shoot as well. Goes without saying. But yeah, I'm just looking at his game log, and I'm seeing quite a few triple doubles so far. So
There you go.
definitely part of his game for sure. And he'll garner some MVP consideration if he continues to play like he's playing. So moving on to a couple more teams.
Somebody who
to
might
discuss.
not be getting MVP consideration anymore.
Yeah, Luka Doncic, my pick for MVP, which I feel personally attacked by some people on various podcasts and said, "Why the hell did everybody assume Luka Doncic would win the MVP?" And I was like, "Yeah, that was me too." Yeah, the Mavericks aren't off to a great start. They've gotten hammered by the coronavirus situation to a pretty significant degree. Unlike the Wizards or the Suns, they haven't had games postponed. They've just had to play shorthanded, which is probably worse for them actually because it decreases the chance of them winning those games. They probably would have preferred just having them thrown on the end of the schedule. But as for Luka himself, it's something that I probably should have noticed and never really did, because you see a lot of highlights of Luka Doncic hitting these awesome step back threes. He shoots terribly from beyond the arc. He shoots at 28% this year, and that's not like it's a drastic dip from what he had been doing. Last year he shot 31.6%, so it's really not that far off. He's never been very good at this, and yet he takes a ton of them. He takes 7 threes a game.
Yeah, you take enough of them, you're gonna make a few of them.
Yeah, I mean, sure, he's got the skills to create the space.
And if you're only taking terrible-looking shots, the ones that you make are going to end up on highlight reels, because, like, how the heck did he do that?
Yeah, like, they're awesome, and the step back that he hit to win that game in the bubble against the Clippers was great, but, I think he needs to either dial those back or find a way to be more accurate with them, because, at some point, 28%, people are going to let you have that. Nobody's intimidated by that. I mean, he's still obviously a terrific player, averaging 27 a game. Let's take a look at his efficiency. His efficiency's down quite a bit from last year.
Well, I would imagine, because if you're scoring that many points, but you're shooting at such a terrible percentage, that means you're taking a lot of shots. It means that your teammates are not taking a lot of shots. It means that you're really, limiting your team's offense.
Yeah, I mean, he's taking 14 twos a game. Like I said, 7 threes a game, and he's averaging about 8 free throws a game, but he's only shooting about 75%, 76% from the stripe. So the efficiency as a total in terms of true shooting percentage is about league average, which you can work around that as a point guard that makes so many plays as he does. I mean, he's averaging almost 10 assists a game as well.
Sure, but if you're supposed to be in the MVP conversation, you can't be league average in anything.
Right, like if you're
much less efficiency.
There's no such thing as an MVP that is average scoring wise in terms of efficiency and doesn't play good defense. Like you can't have it both ways. So
you can't have it no ways.
Yeah, so he's not off to a great start. Certainly not living up to the hype that many, including myself, provided him. And I'll also admit that most of my drive for him to be the MVP wasn't so much saying that he's going to be the best player in the NBA. It was more along the lines of he's going to put up the most eye-popping numbers and his team's going to be good, so then he's going to be rewarded with that award, even though I certainly think that there are quite a few, or at least a handful of players, even before this recent sluggish start to the season, that I thought were just simply objectively better basketball players than him, including LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and Kevin Durant, Steph Curry. Those guys are better players than he is, but I figured that he would have the regular season resume that resembled an MVP, whereas those guys probably aren't that concerned about those awards anymore. So moving on to, we got one more team or two more teams to discuss. Golden State, obviously the Warriors still get a lot of press given the fact that they are the most recent dynasty, but we kind of figured that this year they wouldn't be a real contender given the fact that Klay Thompson sustained the season-ending injury that he did. But they've looked surprisingly good some nights, and some other nights they've looked terrible, which you kind of expect. We talked about this a little bit after their first game, where they got absolutely nothing out of Kelly Oubre and Andrew Wiggins. But at this point, Andrew Wiggins is playing great. He's become a decent enough scorer, and he's actually emerged as a really good defender, which is hilarious because he was a joke of a defender in Minnesota. So it seems like he's embraced sort of the Warriors culture, if you will, which makes sense because the Timberwolves are probably the most embarrassing franchise in the NBA. They just hide behind the Knicks because the Knicks are the Knicks and they get more press because they're in New York City. So
Yeah, but like the Warriors are not known as a defensive team. Steph can't really play defense anymore because of his ankles. Like, so it is interesting though that he would go to Golden State and wind up being a decent defender.
well, Golden State's defense when they were at their best was outstanding, and Steph is still an effective enough defender in terms of what he could do in terms of maintaining rotations and jumping passing lanes and things like that. He's obviously not going to lock anybody down, but he's still I still consider Steph at least a neutral defender. I don't think he's a bad defender by any means. But the person you're forgetting about here is Draymond Green. Draymond
Yes.
Green is the best defensive player of a generation, and he did so by being an incredibly smart defender, which means that he's going to pass off some of that knowledge and some of that drive to other players if they're interested in hearing it. And it seems like Wiggins has embraced that. He's become a really good man defender. He's the guy that they send after guys like Kawhi Leonard, and he's been effective in games like that, especially down the stretch. The Warriors had a game where they rallied back from a big deficit because a big part of the reason why they were able to do that was because Andrew Wiggins kept Kawhi Leonard in check, and then they just let Steph do his thing on the offensive end. I mean, the Warriors started 8-8, but through that first 16 games, they played the toughest schedule in the league. So the fact that they were able to navigate that at 500 speaks to their potential, at least as a playoff team. I mean, I think that they've got too many flaws to really get into contention. I think Kelly Oubre, at this point, I can't see him fitting. He still can't shoot. Sometimes he plays with his head up his ass a little bit. He doesn't really think to pass enough. I mean,
why is this guy in the NBA?
I mean, like honestly, it's weird because Oubre was reasonably effective with the Suns last year, but he just hasn't fit. And then you've also got James Wiseman, who the Warriors are kind of trying to toe the line of trying to compete and win games and trying to develop their young draft pick. And I think Steve Kerr's gotten to the point where he realizes you can still develop the guy and bring him in off the bench. You don't have to start him, because having him and Oubre on the court at the same time was disastrous for the Warriors starting lineup, because Oubre was an ineffective, low IQ player, and James Wiseman, by virtue of the fact that he's a 19-year-old playing in the NBA as a big man, he's hopeless out there a lot of the time. So, they had really no offensive integrity at all, especially when you throw in Draymond Green. You had two guys that could score. There's no such thing as a good offense with only two guys that can score. So, they've decided to tinker with their lineup a little bit. They're playing the Timberwolves tonight again. They played them a couple nights ago. The Timberwolves are the worst team in the NBA besides the Wizards. They're going to probably beat the crap out of them. And it'll be fun to watch, because I think that they're kind of setting up what they hope to be a contending window when Thompson returns next year, because Oubre is going to be gone. He's a free agent, and they'll have Wiggins, who looks like he's becoming a value to a potential championship team. And then hopefully they're figuring having James Wiseman with a year under his belt, he'll become more of what the potential has shown versus what he is right now, which is by far and away a very raw product. So I don't want to say last but not least, because they're pretty least. The New Orleans Pelicans stink. This is a huge disappointment. The team looks like crap. They can't defend. Their offense doesn't flow. J.J. Redick has been off to a terrible start this year, which has compromised their outside shooting. Stan Van Gundy is losing his mind and not winning Coach of the Year, even though I picked him to.
You picking
Your
the Coach of the
preseason
Year
picks
seems to be
have
a
not
kiss
done
of
well.
death.
I Coach of the Year in all sports seems to suck for me.
It's more like Coach for a year.
Well, I don't think Stan Van's getting fired, but
We didn't think Freddie Kitchens was getting fired either.
The fantasy footballers call Mike Wright the fantasy hitman. You're going to be the awards hitman. Just anybody you pick is done.
Yeah, if I picked you in the preseason to do something, don't count on it. So sorry, Lakers, you're not winning the title again. So that's all I've got to say about that. I don't feel like spending too much. Although a little tidbit, apparently the Pelicans called the Warriors. Evan, you'll get a kick out of this. Interested in trading for Kelly Oubre. After I spent the last 2 minutes talking to you about how terrible he is, the Pelicans are interested in shipping potential players, namely J.J. Redick and possibly Lonzo Ball, to the Warriors for 3/4 of a season of Kelly Oubre. Don't ask me why.
Oh, okay.
Although it could possibly be because Oubre is an expiring contract and that'll free up some money for them, but it's possible. I mean, they look like crap. Like this team doesn't look like they have any business being anywhere near the postseason. So maybe they're tanking. I don't know, but that's all I've got for the NBA. Appreciate you guys indulging me and participating in the discussion a little bit. So it can be kind of fun at times. But I guess we'll move on to other topics. We'll get to some baseball. We'll start. I think we should start with what happened last Friday with Henry Aaron's passing.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody that knows anything about baseball knows who Hank Aaron is and was, and the achievement that he was able to reach by passing Babe Ruth's home run record, which is the crown jewel of records in all of American sports. There's nothing that compares to being the home run king. And Hank owned that record for a little over 30 years before Barry Bonds broke it in somewhat controversial fashion in a lot of people's minds. But a lot of people still consider Hank Aaron the home run king. And I don't feel compelled to argue with them. But nevertheless, he was a fantastic baseball player. And I think a lot of times people lose focus on that because they hear about, 7-15, and they watch him trotting around the base paths with the two dorks that ran out of the stands and were running the base paths with them. And they kind of forget that he wasn't just somebody that broke a Babe Ruth record. He was better than Babe Ruth. Like, period, endo story. He was a better baseball player than Babe Ruth. And I say that with conviction, and I've reiterated this many times, both privately and publicly, that if you didn't play baseball in an era that allowed African Americans to play in the major leagues, your statistics, your profile comes at a severe discount.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel about players that played in the 20s and the 30s and before that. I see them as – I give them credit for performing and being really good and being great, but I don't give them as much credit as the raw numbers indicate. No way, no how.
Yeah, I mean, the one argument that you could maybe make for Babe Ruth in that discussion would be the fact that he was also a pitcher, and he did it pretty well. But outside of that, I mean, I'm in full agreement with you. If you can't sit here and say that you're the best at something if you didn't play against all of the competition. Babe Ruth can't say that he played against all the competition. So I think you kind of have to say that Hank Aaron was better than him. I mean, certainly that doesn't mean that you would say that. I mean, I can't think of a player off the top of my head, but you wouldn't say that just anybody these days is better than Babe Ruth just because. But when you're talking about the home run king, I'm going to take the guy who did it while playing against everybody, white guys, black guys, Hispanic guys, everyone, instead of the guy who's only playing against white players.
I mean, Hank Aaron, I mean, he was tremendous. I mean, obviously for the home runs, but like I pulled up the all-time RBIs list. He's leading that as well.
I know how much Eric loves RBIs. It's his favorite stat. He
Well,
says
I mean,
he says
RBIs
that it's the best way to tell if a player is good is if he gets at least 100 RBIs in a season. That's what Eric has always told me.
RBIs are kind of weird, but like,
and he can't argue with me because he's got a mouthful of food right now.
Yes. Mouthful of double cheeseburger. So he's the all-time leader in runs batted in. Hank Aaron is also third all-time in hits. The only people who have more hits than him are Pete Rose and Ty Cobb.
I don't think I realized that. I knew that he had a lot of hits. I didn't realize that he was number 3 on that list. That's impressive.
37-71.
That's impressive.
Yeah, that's insane.
Now,
I think
let me ask you this.
underreported.
Let me ask you this, because with the recent decision to include records from the Negro Leagues, do you know if that includes stats from that? Because I don't remember if he was getting much of a bump from that change. I don't think that Hank Aaron was getting much of a bump from that, but I don't remember specifically. So I'm the only reason I asked that, not because it matters, is more just I'm wondering, has he been number 3 and I just didn't realize that, or is that a recent change based on that decision? And I
think he's been number 3 for a while.
Okay.
And Hank Aaron only played 26 games in the Negro Leagues, so the numbers that he accrued there
wouldn't have boosted him that much.
Because I was actually curious about that with regards to his home runs, whether or not he had more. Because Barry Bonds only hit 7 more than Hank Aaron did for his career, but Hank Aaron only hit 5 in the Negro League. So I was wondering, does that boost to his numbers put him back on top, just as a curiosity? But as it turns out, it does not. So I can't imagine that the needle moves much for hits either.
Fair enough.
But
that's where the question was coming from. So,
just to mention it, since Corey decided to throw RBIs in there, which, I don't pretend like they don't exist. I mean, RBIs are still, a stat.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I think it's important, like, when you get a lot of them, right? Like, oh, you're doing something pretty good. If you get a lot of runs batted in.
Yeah, but it's also you only get them if you come up to bat with players who have already reached base ahead of you,
or if you hit it out.
Yeah, but if you're the all-time leader, in RBIs, you're probably pretty damn awesome. But for some more advanced stats, Hank Aaron is 7th all-time in wins above replacement, behind Babe Ruth, who played before integration, Walter Johnson, who played before integration, Cy Young, who played before integration, Ty Cobb, who played before integration, Barry Bonds, Willie Mays, and then him. So the only guys that he was behind that played post-integration were black guys. So, I feel like that's a pretty compelling statement about how good the players of the Negro Leagues were as well. I mean, there's no doubt that a lot of those guys could have played in some combined league that would later become what we know as Major League Baseball, when that talent pool was allowed to compete in the majors. So there's no doubt he was absolutely one of the best of all time. And, there's always a lot of information about the crap that he put up with during that home run chase. And people talk about the dignity that he had. And, I'm probably not the one that should be discussing this at great length, given my background as, a white guy that never got to see him play. But I do get a little tired of hearing about stuff like that when it relates to Martin Luther King as well, where we talk about the dignity and the great character they had without ever doing a little bit of self-reflection about why they had to be that way. What was the situation that they were in and who created that? It's always like, that was just the mode. Well, no, it was the mode and it was awful. And there should be some level of personal reflection and accountability for that from the people that made life difficult for athletes like Henry Aaron.
I mean, it's not like that mode was, set up by mistake. Right?
Sure.
This was done on purpose for centuries. So, you're sort of absolving the people responsible. It's like, oh, well, he just dealt with it because he's so great. Well, why was the situation so terrible?
I mean, it speaks to sort of this mode that we're in now, where a lot of people want to acknowledge what happened without taking any responsibility for it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people that saw him play are still alive. It's not like this is something that happened, 150 years ago, where nobody on Earth or in America today saw this happen. I mean, the man received death threats while chasing the home run king. The man was threatened to be killed because he had the audacity to be better at a sport than a white
hit a
guy.
ball. The audacity.
It's beyond understanding for people like us, probably, because we've grown up in an environment where we're taught to be better than that. But the reality is, a lot of the people that surround us day to day, they don't have that, and that's their fault at this point. You can
It's their
be
fault then too.
yeah, you can be taught certain things when you're young. Eventually, you've got to figure it out for yourself. And if you came away with a different opinion as a grown ass man or a grown ass woman, to think that that type of persecution for somebody that done nothing to you, but just go out there and be a baseball player or anybody, that speaks to your lack of character, and maybe you need to rectify that before praising somebody whose life you tried to make hell.
And Hank Aaron, when the Braves moved here from Milwaukee, he was reluctant to come to Atlanta in the mid '60s for obvious reasons.
I was just gonna say, I
You know,
wonder
like why would you sign up to come to Georgia if you're a black man? It's not like he really had a choice. If he was under contract, there's no free agency or anything like that. He can just you know what, I want to play for whatever team. Like he didn't have a choice, but still, it's understandable to have some second thoughts and to wonder, do I really want to go to Atlanta in 1965? That's probably not what you want to do as a black man. But he was he was not only just a baseball player, but he certainly in this city helped with the civil rights movement and stuff. He made a difference in that regard as well. I've actually been to there's a marker in the parking lot down by the former Turner Field with the fence where he hit number 715. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and the influence he's had beyond baseball with, he kind of pushed really hard for, black men and black women to have opportunities to be, in charge of not just baseball teams or, part of operations like that. He really participated heavily in empowering young black people to have fair opportunities beyond just baseball. So he's a huge influence in that regard. I mean, I don't think anybody with two brain cells to rub together would say that he was anything but an icon and a hero to many, and that's how it should be.
Absolutely.
So we'll move on to the people who aren't getting into the Hall of Fame, unlike Henry Aaron. No inductees this year. I forget, when was the last time that happened? Because they
2013.
Okay, so it hasn't been that long, but yeah, no inductees this year. I think Curt Schilling had the highest vote share at 71%.
Yep.
Yeah.
But obviously 75 is the threshold, so he fell short. But of course, naturally, we know how Curt Schilling is. He's got a interesting.
Basically, if Aubrey Huff was a good player.
Yes, if Aubrey Huff was good at baseball.
Oh my
yes.
God. Yeah, pretty much.
That's how you would describe him. But Curt Schilling basically demanded that the Baseball Writers Association of America removed him from the Hall of Fame ballot next year, which I think would be his final year on the ballot. And, given the fact that he's at 71%, presumably would have a pretty darn good shot at getting in.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much anybody who gets to 70% ends up getting into the Hall of Fame at some point.
Yeah, so he seemed like he's felt persecuted for, he said being a Republican, when he was initially on the ballot and he wasn't getting in. And, I'm not going to say that's the case because John Smoltz got in and he's a Republican. It's more like you're just a bad person. I mean, and people, and there's always this debate about, should your personality matter and should that affect, how you get in? And my answer to that is it's up to the people that are voting. I mean,
it's up to the people who are voting, and it's also the more that you are vocal about the things that you believe, the more those things end up getting.
The more they define you.
Yeah, exactly. The more they define you, and the less you can remove that from your consideration when you're, deciding on whether to vote somebody in or not. If you really want nothing but your play on the field to be taken into consideration, then you
Then
really
shut up.
you have to shut up. You have to retire from the sport, and you have to go live in a
Go
shack
fishing
somewhere.
somewhere.
Yeah, go fishing somewhere. Until you get in, and then after that, you can have at it. You can say whatever you want. Once you're in, you can't be taken out because you said something stupid. But like it just the thing that got me was during his, we'll call it a rant. I don't know that it was necessarily a rant that he gave, but as he was demanding that his name be taken off the list by the Baseball Writers Association of America, he was basically saying, I don't think that I'm a Hall of Famer, but we'll leave it up to I guess the veteran voters, because they know the sport better than these young writers do. These young writers don't know baseball and this and that, and just like, okay, clown, like just go away.
Yeah. So what bothers me about the Baseball Writers Association of America, like they seem to be like the gatekeepers, like the Baseball Hall of Fame is really canonizing people for sainthood. Like that's not what we're doing here. It's not the hall of whether you like him or not. It's incontrovertible that Kurt Schilling is a racist and an asshole and etc. But you can't tell me that he doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. You can't. There's if you watched him play, like, oh well, there's a Hall of Famer right there. There's no real reason other than you obviously disagree with all the nonsense he says on Twitter and wherever.
The irony to me, though, is the fact that Schilling points out, or he complains about these young writers that don't know baseball. It's young people that are caping for him because his more advanced stats that young people look at are really good.
Mm-hmm.
Like a big part of the reason why he wasn't getting consideration early wasn't because of
200 wins or something like that.
Yeah, he barely had 200 wins, so he was being written off. And I think his career ERA wasn't that special. But a lot of times, like his numbers are 216 wins, a 3.46 ERA. He never won a Cy Young, but he's a World Series MVP. No, he never won a Cy Young. But he's a 3-time champion, and he had more than 3,000 strikeouts. His career wins above replacement per Baseball Reference was 79.5, which is decisively Hall of Fame worthy. So, I mean, the advanced metrics say put him in. Mm-hmm. It's the old guard that look at wins and say, 216 wins, no Cy Youngs, that's not good enough for us. It's more like the younger people are looking at it and say, holy hell, this guy was really good. It's the same thing that happened with Mike Mussina. Because
Tim Raines.
Yeah, I mean, these are guys that were overlooked by a lot of people because they didn't have the mystical 300 wins or didn't win a Cy Young, and people looked at them and said, no, these guys were awesome. And they're definitely Hall of Fame worthy. So, I wouldn't expect Kurt Schilling to know what he's talking about. He never has in his entire miserable life.
Probably never
will. And so, for my personal spite towards him, I wouldn't mind seeing him not get in. But in terms of, his quality as a baseball player, objectively, he's a Hall of Famer, and I think he should be in.
Yeah, I mean, what are you looking at other than the tweets and stuff? Like, not everybody in the Hall of Fame currently is a perfect human being.
Oh, no. Ty Cobb? Come on.
Ty Cobb, the original Hall of Famer and the raging racist and Georgia native, he's in the Hall of Fame. So, I'm sure there's a bunch of other people who weren't great either that are in the Hall of Fame, but you want to make an example out of this guy like that's just not... that just doesn't make any sense.
I don't know.
And the Hall of Fame is supposed to tell the story of what happened in the sport, not a bunch of anonymous writers. You're like, oh well, I don't like him because he's a jerk.
To be fair, you can tell the story of baseball just fine without Kurt Schilling.
Can you?
Yeah.
If you're a Yankees
think you're
fan,
looking at your shirt a little bit too much right now. There's some stuff that happened against your Yankees. It was pretty relevant.
Twice.
Yeah. Have you forgotten?
He hasn't won a Cy Young.
He hasn't won a Cy Young. Okay.
So you can tell the story of baseball without him.
Okay, we're gonna move on now.
That's. I mean, we don't disagree that is incorrect. What you're saying, you're just wrong. Like,
I think you can tell the story of baseball just fine without him.
Corey's being cheeky and salty at the same time.
I'm not even being salty. Honestly, I forgot that he was on those two teams.
No, you didn't. No, you did not.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. So I didn't pay attention to the players that were on the other team against mine.
You should have been paying attention to him. He was dominating.
With a bloody sock. I seem to recall that.
That was him.
He also come out of the bullpen in 2001 on like 0 days of rest. It's like, I just pitched 9 innings last night. Let me just come in and close it out in Game 7.
Didn't remember that. That was Curt Schilling.
Well, you should have done your research, Corey, because that's a pretty big fail. But moving on.
If you had asked me to guess, I probably would have said it was Tim Wakefield or something.
Tim Wakefield, the knuckleballer, is dominating the Yankees. What?
He was the only pitcher that I knew for them, and it's because he was a knuckleballer.
You didn't know Pedro Martinez?
Oh, yeah. True. I didn't pay attention to the Red Sox other than when they were playing us, and I didn't care about which players were there.
They were playing the Yankees. That's what we're saying.
Okay, we're moving on because this has been our baseball acumen as an aggregate is looking very bad right now. So we're going to move on to something that Corey also doesn't know about, which is the Baltimore Orioles.
Yeah, how's Ubaldo Jimenez doing? He's still playing well for them?
Nah, he gone. He been gone.
Hot hole. Never heard from him again.
Yeah. So Corey saw me at least bitching on the chat about Masson dismissing seemingly the entire Orioles broadcast team pre-post game and the announcing crew. Namely, Gary Thorne has been let go by the team to be replaced by presumably Scott Garceau will be the primary play-by-play guy, which, obviously Gary Thorne has been the voice of the Orioles for a long while now, and most Orioles fans are pretty attached to him. But, people move on and things like that happen. We have to accept it. But replacing him with Scott Garceau, that's salt in the wound. I would have loved this to be more of a full-time gig for Kevin Brown, who I thought was terrific.
Amazing.
He was fantastic in the games that he called last year. Had a little bit of a young, Joe Buck to him, except a little more energy than young Joe had. And I like Joe Buck. I'm a big Joe Buck guy at this point in my journey through life. But
yeah, we weren't that big on him when he was younger.
Well, but we were also younger and kind of dumb, so we probably have to accept that some of that was us.
Or you just admitted you weren't paying attention, so
He knew who was calling the game, just not who was playing in it. Unless they were wearing pillowcases and ugly hats with bird poop on them shaped like an N and a Y. Anywho's, so obviously disappointing news. The hardest thing, about being an Orioles fan right now is the fact that the team sucks. And that wasn't going to change based off of who was calling the games. But, when you have the familiar voices of guys that have been with you for as long as Gary Thorne had, and as long as Rick Dempsey and Mike Bordick and Tom Davis had, especially Tom Davis, he's been around forever.
Jim Hunter as well. They got rid of him too.
Yeah, Jim Hunter gone as well. I mean, these guys go through it all with you. They live out the full 162. And there's a feeling of a little bit of misery loves company and just a little bit of, making it more tolerable to watch bad baseball. But when you've got a new crew of guys that just you've never heard of, specifically when they're not that good, like Scott Garceau, no disrespect to the man. I'm sure he's good at other things, but
his radio show in the afternoons was really good.
Yeah, but him calling play-by-play, that was definitely not his forte. And I'm disappointed. Doesn't begin to describe. This feels like a cheap out move for Peter Angelos and the Angelos family, which, they do that sometimes. But, we got to deal with it. It is what it is. I'm not going to stop watching the Orioles because the broadcast team went from, good to probably not that good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also disappointed, but, it's really more relevant, the players on the field. These are just the people who sort of describe it to you. But, my rooting interest isn't going to change based on who's calling the games.
All right.
Eric, your video has been frozen for a while, but
Oh,
I still
okay.
hear you.
Well, that's the most important part. This is an audio medium, not a visual one. So,
right, yeah.
So in other Orioles news, it's a little bit more uplifting, I guess.
Is it?
Maybe.
I'm not uplifted.
It's not as bad as the entire broadcast team getting fired. But the Orioles signed Freddie Galvis, who played for the Reds last season. He's a middle infielder. Not much to write home about statistically. Batted .220 last year. Had 7 home runs, which again, consider the fact that it was only a 60-game season. That's not bad pop, I guess. But OPS is 712. That's about 14% below the National League average last year. So not a whole lot to talk about as a hitter. Defensively, looks kind of middle of the pack for the most part as a defender. So how should I feel about this? I feel like we just signed a subpar player.
I feel, all right.
I mean, he's also not exactly young. He's 31.
He's been around. I remember when he first came up with the Phillies. Like, they still had, weren't the Phillies good then? Like, I think they had just gotten rid of Jimmy Rollins, and they still had Ryan Howard and those people.
He started, his first year with the Phillies was the year that the Phillies fell off. It was in 2012 when they collapsed and the Nationals won the division that year. And I don't think the Phillies have been in the playoffs since then. So, well, did they make the playoffs this year in the 8-game format? I don't remember.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't remember. Either way, not
red teams in the National League.
Yeah, I know. It's especially confusing when a guy goes from the Phillies to the Reds, and it's like, although he did have a little stop in San Diego,
with the Padres.
Yeah,
was he on the Cardinals too?
He was with the Blue Jays for 115 games in 2019. So a little bit of a journeyman situation going on. His best season by wins above replacement was in 2019 with the Blue Jays. Actually, the combined year with the Blue Jays and the Reds, he had 2.6 wins above replacement, which is okay. It's pretty average. So I'm not expecting a whole lot here, but I don't expect a whole lot from the Orioles in general at this point in the rebuild. Let's hope that things get better sooner rather than later, but I'll just accept any time in the next 50 years.
Well, I mean, with the Orioles, the major league club, I don't expect a whole lot of wins. I would like to see improvement from the young guys.
Yeah.
That's really all I want.
Yep.
And then I get excited when the real big prospects get called up. But other than that, I mean, we're just waiting for the minor leaguers to be ready to come to the majors.
All right, so we'll move on to professional football now. We'll recap the conference championship games that we just saw on Sunday. And we've actually got some mailbag questions from Drew that we kind of twisted his arm for just a couple of hours before the show, but nevertheless, he produced. So we'll start with that, recapping the Packers and the Bucs. The Bucs beat the Packers in Lambeau Field 31-26. And so
I had that.
Good for you.
John, any confidence points this week? Could we just
No. We went 0 for 24, and Evan went 24 for 24. So, golf clap for Evan. I'm not sure how that affects the standings.
It affects them big time, actually.
He jumped past me in the season long, and he jumped past both of us in the playoffs.
Well, I only care about the season long. That playoffs doesn't interest me. But our good buddy Andrew asked, in relation to the Tampa Bay win, I guess I'll read this verbatim, although it doesn't really read very well. Tom Brady and the Stairway to 7, win or lose. Yes, win or lose. Does everyone agree that Tom Brady?
Win or loss.
I said lose because loss doesn't make any sense. Win or lose, does everyone agree that Tom Brady is the undisputed GOAT now? No ifs, ands, buts, or maybes whatsoever.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think everybody's going to agree with that, but I think the consensus has been for a while now that Tom Brady's the greatest quarterback of all time. and I don't think that that's going to change regardless of what happens on Super Bowl Sunday in a week and a half. I think that right now people are kind of looking at Patrick Mahomes as the potential challenger, even though that's totally unfair to a dude who's only in his third season as a starter, saying, "Hey, are you going to be the GOAT?" But
Patrick Mahomes is the Grogu to Tom Brady's Yoda.
Okay, yeah, I guess.
heard Mahomes described as the GOAT kid. I thought that was fun.
That's kind of fun. But my thing about this is that I think it's interesting not because this isn't going to affect Brady's legacy now, but to that discussion of whether Patrick Mahomes could overtake him as the greatest quarterback of all time by consensus, which has always been, and I think unfairly, it's basically a ring counting contest. If you got the most rings, you're the GOAT. Joe Montana was the GOAT because he had 4. That was pretty much the whole conversation. Now, nobody talked about Terry Bradshaw, but he played for the Steelers with the Iron Curtain, so it doesn't count. But Joe Montana, he won 4 rings. Once Brady won 5, everybody said it's Brady. So does that mean that Patrick Mahomes has to win 7 to pass him? I think that sounds a little nuts.
I think that's
or 7 championships.
Well, I mean, like that would be the thing. If you're gonna make it about rings, then chances are nobody is ever going to overtake Brady to become the greatest of all time. He's going to be the greatest of all time forever, most likely.
For all time.
But I don't think that everybody necessarily looks at it that way. I mean, Joe Montana was widely considered the GOAT, but plenty of people said that Dan Marino was better. I'm not saying everybody did. Certainly not everybody did. But there were people who held that Dan Marino was better than Joe Montana, despite the fact that he had no rings. And he lost the only opportunity that he had to get one. So there have been other players who have been considered GOATs or potential GOATs who didn't have the rings. I think that one of the reasons that I have come around on Tom Brady is not because he continues to win Super Bowls, after Peyton Manning is retired, and it's the fact that he's continuing to play at the level he is at his age. He isn't slowing down. His game the other day, looking at the at Football Outsiders quick reads, Aaron Rodgers had the better game than Brady, but if you were to ask me based on just how it looked during the game, Brady was playing better and Brady looked fantastic. And if Aaron Rodgers was better, that's pretty darn impressive because Brady was good on Sunday. He was dropping dimes. He was playing. Some of his best passes came in the most critical situations on third downs. He made an absolute dime of a pass for a touchdown with 12 seconds left in the first half to push the Bucs out even more.
He did throw 3 interceptions on Sunday.
He did throw 3 interceptions against a decent defense. He hasn't been perfect, and that's probably the main reason that Aaron Rodgers ended up, with the higher DYAR is those interceptions. But Brady doesn't look like Peyton Manning did in his last year, where he was just throwing ducks and couldn't put any power on the football when he was throwing it. Brady still looks good. He's still accurate. He's still he hasn't regressed, and that's impressive. That's enough for me to say I can't say that Peyton Manning is better than him anymore, because even though I think that Peyton Manning at his absolute best might have been better than Brady at his absolute best, Manning couldn't maintain it for anywhere near as long as what Brady has maintained his best.
I mean, Manning and Brady were contemporaries. Manning is about to be elected to the Hall of Fame, and Brady's still playing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Manning was only drafted, 2 years before Brady? Was it 2?
Yep. Yeah, he played, Manning started right away, whereas Brady sat for his
So, I mean, you could say effectively he had 3, he started 3 years earlier, but as far as age-wise, Manning's only 2 years older than him, and here, as Evan just said, he's about to get inducted because he's been retired long enough, and Brady is about to play in a Super Bowl. He's got another year on his contract, and for all we know, he could play beyond that.
He's going to play till he's 100.
Yeah. So here's the thing about Brady's resume as the GOAT. I know that consensus is always going to be primarily based off of rings, but, I prefer to have deeper discussions than that because I think that's kind of lame.
I agree.
But
I hate rings being the end-all, be-all.
Yeah, but
obviously Charles Barkley was a bum.
yeah, he couldn't play.
Fat and slow, couldn't play. Basically, I mean, he's worse than JaVale McGee and Adam Morrison.
Hey, that's true.
JaVale McGee's a 3-time champion.
Yep.
So let's keep that in mind. But
JaVale
Brady's
McGee is better than
resume
Isaiah
is so
Thomas.
Brady's resume is so difficult to top because he hits you everywhere. He's one of the statistically greatest quarterbacks ever. Like if you look at the year-by-year performance, it's outstanding. Like there's only maybe 2 or 3 guys that could say on a year-by-year basis I was better than Tom Brady. That's probably Peyton Manning, Steve Young, and maybe somebody from like the 60s who we don't really trust that much as far as numbers go, like Bart Starr or somebody like that. I don't know, but like he's up there with those guys when it comes to that, annual type of performance. And then you throw on the fact that he's been doing it for 20 years, seemingly without any blips on the radar. I mean, he's been doing this since 2001. He had a top 5 passing season this year.
He was, I believe, the most effective deep ball thrower in the NFL this year. This is a guy who, for years, like the narrative was that he played so well because he just checked the ball down a lot, and that's why he avoided interceptions. And he had players who could get a lot of yards after the catch, and that's why he got touchdowns. And he was really a game manager who was just in Belichick's system. But he was the best deep ball thrower in the NFL at age 42.
Yeah, and the issue that I have with trying to appease people that would say, it was more Belichick than Brady is the fact that nobody makes that argument unless they want Brady not to be the GOAT. So,
yeah, that's true.
So when they make that argument, and then when you point to this season and say, see, he went to a different team with a completely different system that required him to throw deep at age 43, and he flourished, and he got his team to the playoffs.
That's Bruce Arians.
He won 3 straight playoff games on the road because he was actually in a tough division, and he had to go as a wild card for the first time in his career, and yet he still got to the Super Bowl. You can point out
he did it against 3 of the best quarterbacks that have ever played in the NFL: Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, and Taylor Heineke.
Yes, there's the joke. But so like people that make those arguments clearly aren't interested in being proven wrong. They're only interested in pushing the narrative they want to believe. So there's really no point in even discussing it, although it does force them to kind of shut up and sit in the corner and tout.
The one thing that I will say is that if we like to look at more than rings, and so that gives Patrick Mahomes a chance to become the GOAT, to us at least, because we're going to look at other things. But it is going to be very difficult for anybody to make that argument for him if he can't beat Tom Brady in the Super Bowl. Because if we can sit here and say, well, Tom Brady beat him in the Super Bowl, that really takes away from that argument down the road.
I mean, Mahomes only has one playoff loss,
and it's
to Tom
Brady.
Yep. I mean, again though, but I just think that boiling anything down to one game when Tom has been playing 20 years worth of football, building this resume that he has. I mean, he's got 33 playoff wins. The second closest guy is Montana with less than half of that. Like, it used to be that 16 playoff wins was seen as like a really hard record to break. Tom has lapped him in that regard. So, that is such a, like, that is the most compelling record that he has, in my opinion. It's just like, look how long I've been around and look how I consistently beat usually the best teams in the league, throw in an occasional win over the Washington football team who really didn't belong there, but whatever. I mean, it's just the resume is so deep. And to be honest, Patrick Mahomes is great, but he's been in the league for 5 minutes, and I want to see what Mahomes does with a new set of teammates at some point, and he will have to at some point because that's the nature of the NFL. He is a great player that has been gifted an incredible situation, and like a great player does, he's taken advantage of that by winning a hell of a lot of games, putting up incredible numbers, and looking awesome. And that's kind of what Dan Marino did early in his career. But Dan Marino from like 83 to 86 was decisively the statistical greatest quarterback ever. You could make the case that that's still the case for that time period. And then for the rest of the career, he was just really good. Like, he wasn't the same.
Yeah.
And that could easily happen because what happens if all of a sudden your offensive line sucks? What if Travis Kelce ages out and you don't have him anymore? What if Andy Reid retires? Any number of things can happen where just looking at a guy for 3 years and saying, "Oh yeah, that's the next GOAT." Let's slow down. Because we could have said the same thing about Aaron Rodgers when he started off hot in his career, and things didn't quite work out so well for him. And it's not his fault. It doesn't make him less of a player. It just means that not everybody has the same circumstances all the time.
Well, I think that's one of the things that you can give Aaron Rodgers a little bit of additional credit for is the fact that he's bounced back, and this year he had one of the greatest statistical seasons of all time, despite the fact that it's hard to say he doesn't have talent around him because clearly he does. He's got Devontae Adams, one of, if not the best wide receiver in the NFL right now. He's got a couple of really good running backs in Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, both of whom can not only run the ball, but they can catch the ball and do stuff with it out of the backfield. And, he's got some other weapons who have really, wound up being pretty good. Marquez Valdes-Scantling has been a really solid player this year. Allen Lazard, when he's been healthy. Robert Tonyan, I believe, was by advanced metrics, was the number 2 tight end in the NFL behind only Travis Kelce. And I think a couple of advanced stats actually had him ahead of Travis Kelce. So, he's had some players, but the team has not, actually put any effort into building up around him offensively. And yet, he's had a really good year this year.
So let's talk about him a little more, though. Not to mention he's also had one of the best offensive lines in the league for the last 5 years. But Rodgers had some interesting remarks after the game where he seemed to be pretty cryptic about his future in the league. And he kind of had some interesting comments before the game. I think earlier that week he said something about his future being a, quote, a beautiful mystery or some goofy,
Which is weird because he's under contract with the Packers through 2023.
Yeah, but you know how those things go.
So what?
So there's some indication that Rodgers could leave the Packers. He could leave Green Bay.
Some indication? We were sitting here on live broadcasts when the Packers gave that indication.
Yes, when they drafted Jordan Love, that's true. But
Jordan Love, who played 0 snaps.
He didn't even suit up. They could not even justify making him the clipboard holder during games. And they used a first-round pick. They traded up into the first round to draft that guy.
I mean, when the Ravens drafted Lamar, that first year, Joe was the starter. But, Lamar played some. He was out there a little bit.
Yeah, they used him in gadget plays and stuff like that.
Yeah, but Aaron Rodgers played 1,164 snaps. Someone named Tim Boyle played 22 snaps.
Yeah.
I have no idea who that is.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of things have happened since that draft pick as well. I think that Rodgers was a little salty over the decision to kick the field goal when they were down 8. It was 4th and goal from the 8. And, LaFleur says, I'm going to kick the field goal, at which point Brian Clark made just an exquisite reference to D12 on Get Up, referring to Rodgers as, you don't want to send Bizarre out there. You want to send Eminem in the rap battle. And I think that was spot on pretty much. And you can't really argue, that he made a logical move. But I could also see how that would piss off your star quarterback by basically saying, I trust my defense to get a stop against Tom Brady more than I trust you to score a touchdown on 4th and goal from the 8-yard line.
I mean, yeah, what? Why would you give the ball back to Tom Brady like that? Even though he is 43.
And had slung 3 picks in the second half.
Yeah, if that guy smells blood in the water, I don't want him having the football.
No, not at all. But I would have understood the move a little more if there was 5 minutes left, because then if the Bucs moved the ball enough to kill the entire clock, then they probably would have scored anyway. They would have driven down to field goal position, and then the points moot, because even if you had gone for it and scored, you would have lost anyway because you would have given up a game-winning drive. But with 2 minutes left, you're leaving your defense very little room for error. And then, of course, Bruce Arians tried so hard to give them all the free time possible. First, you had the clown that decided he was going to slide, with 2:02 on the clock on the kickoff return, instead of letting the clock get down to the 2-minute warning. So that saved Green Bay a timeout. And then they get 2nd and 1. Green Bay says, hey, Just take the first down so that we can kind of reset the downs here. And the Bucs accepted the penalty. No, decline the penalty, take it 2nd and 1, pick up a first down, and get yourself an extra play to kill time. Didn't do that. So then they had to rely on I don't understand why it was a controversial flag, why people are complaining about the pass interference flag that gave them the decisive first down. But they
ripped the guy's shirt off. Like, that's a penalty.
It's like they were griping, like saying, well, they've been letting them get away with holding and pass interference like that all day. I'm like, not like that they weren't.
That's egregious.
It's like, yeah, the pick that Rodgers threw at the end of the first half, yes, there was pass interference on that. But the ref's indication is not to sit there and say, we're just not going to call this penalty. It's to say, we're only going to call it if it's 100% guaranteed that that's what it is. And that play, despite the fact that on replay it was clearly PI, you could make the argument in real time, it just looked like hand fighting and it wasn't worth throwing the flag. But when the dude's shirt is going from medium to extra large because you're stretching it out, you have to throw the flag. You can't. That's another Saint situation right there if you don't throw that flag. Like, it's another disaster for the league if the dude's shirt is being pulled like that and you say, we're going to let it go, and now the Bucs have to punt.
I agree. It's so obvious. Like, the referee is a fool if you don't throw the flag on that play. Like, why are you even here if you're not going to throw that penalty?
Yeah, had no choice. No choice at all. So we'll move to the AFC Championship game between the Bills and the Chiefs. And, wow, the Chiefs some sort of boat raced the Bills in this one. This was the Bills jumped out to a 9-0 lead because the Chiefs made a mistake and muffed a punt deep in their own territory. And then it was all Chiefs. Like, it was – I think they said the Bills scored the first 9 points, and they scored the last 9 points. And in the middle, they got beat 38-6. So –
the Bills' offense got completely outclassed. The Bills' defense did not show up at all. Like you said, the one big play they had was that it was a mistake on the returner, and the special teams just happened to pick it up, and the Bills were able to punch it in from 2 or 3 yards out. But outside of that, Josh Allen looked terrible. He had a couple of okay running plays, but he didn't throw the ball very well. Stephon Diggs did absolutely nothing until well too late in the fourth quarter. Gabriel Davis was atrocious. It was a slaughter.
Yeah, this game wasn't close. This Mahomes guy is pretty good.
The score was a lot closer than the game was, and the score wasn't that close.
Make sure our listeners are aware that should watch this Mahomes guy. He has a promising career a little bit.
He's all right.
Yeah, yeah.
He's a little bit better than we all thought that he would be when we were making our fantasy predictions a couple years ago.
Oh yeah. I can't say I'd really heard of him before 2018. This game wasn't close. The Bills didn't seem like they had any answers for what the Chiefs were doing on offense. Like, the Chiefs seemed like they could just do whatever they wanted to do offensively. All their people were always wide open. Did they even pressure Mahomes at all? Like, he wasn't getting hit and thrown around or confused or anything like that. Like, he was just doing whatever he felt like doing.
Which is crazy because the Chiefs are down now at this point with the Eric Fisher injury. They're down like 4 starting linemen this season. That's an area where they've had a lot of injuries, and yet the Bills provided absolutely no punch to that on that defensive front. They did not get home at all. I'm just thinking back to it. I think among the competitive drives that the Chiefs had on offense, they scored touchdowns on all of them except for 2. One of which Tyreek Hill dropped a deep ball on the first drive of the game, and the other of which they had to settle for a field goal. So they basically scored on every drive except for the ones where they made mistakes. The Bills never earned anything on the Chiefs. They looked like a peewee team out there. It was not even competitive. And then you had Sean McDermott settling for field goals multiple times.
What are you doing?
Inside the 10-yard line. somebody described this. It's like Sopranos logic, where the mafia is going to whack you, and so they're escorting you to tell you to get into the trunk of the car, and you can either sit there and fight and try to get away, which if you fail there, they're probably just going to kill you right away, or you could hop into the trunk and guarantee your death, but you'll stay alive a little longer. Kicking the field goal is like getting in the trunk. It's like you have simply said, we can't win, we're done, but we're not going to be completely out of it until later, so it's worth it to stay alive for an extra 5 minutes being terrified.
Yeah, just get in the trunk.
It's weak sauce.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Billick, I'll always remember, talk about back when the Ravens were going to go play the Titans in 2000. I think that's what he was talking about. When you go into the Lions' Den, you don't tippy-toe in. Sorry, the defending champion at home in the AFC Championship game. Sounds like the Lions' Den to me. And the Bills seemed kind of determined with all the kicking field goals to tippy-toe in and to tippy-toe out with no hardware. So I don't know what they're doing. Like what you got to go for it sometimes. You're probably not stopping Mahomes a whole bunch. So you need to get as many points as you can, and then live with the results if it doesn't work.
Yeah, I know that playoff games typically are not, calculated into the postseason awards, or if they are, it's very minimal. But to me, that game should cost Sean McDermott any claim that he had to the Coach of the Year award, which I thought that he should win at the end of the regular season. That game alone, I think, should disqualify him.
Oh, well, I mean, it's a regular season award, so if he won it, he had already won it.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I know that these things are really based on the regular season, but I feel like postseason should be able to disqualify you for getting it.
Yeah,
I mean, let's just say the postseason has a different award, the Vince Lombardi Trophy.
It's one thing to get out-coached by that. I mean, it's one thing to be out-coached by Andy Reid because he's a really good coach, but Sean McDermott, coached himself and his own team out of that game.
I mean, they're never really in it, but
they were winning 9-0 They had plenty of time to make adjustments.
Winning against Kansas City.
Yeah, that's a mirage. I mean,
I get that, but they had the lead, and their team was already not playing that well. Now you've got a cushion with which to have some time to make adjustments, and they never did it.
I mean, that's the Houston Texans. They're up 24-0, and they got boat raced.
Again, another well-coached establishment by Bill O'Brien. But so I will say this, Corey. You ready to take back your blasphemy that Sean McDermott's a better coach than Sean Payton?
No.
I'm going to pretend like I didn't hear that. That's insanity. It's insanity that you would say something like that. You're going to take away the Coach of the Year award from him. But
I'm not giving it to Sean Payton.
I didn't say you should give it to Sean Payton, but Sean Payton's earned plenty, on his own.
I mean, Sean Payton has demonstrated that he's got the onions to go for it in big situations.
That's true. That is true. That's definitely on his resume, sometimes to a fault.
To a fault, yeah.
So, do we have anything else about Bills Chiefs?
Not really. This wasn't that compelling of a game.
Yeah, some of the stuff I saw from Josh Allen, he looked a little bit like, reckless version of Josh Allen. The stupid, I'm going to backpedal a million yards while a dude's hanging off of me before I take a sack. That's the type of stuff
in high school, Josh Allen.
Yeah, that's stuff that jeez. It's stuff that he's got to clean up a little bit. But I mean, I also understand he's playing in the AFC Championship game as an underdog, on the road. This is a situation where I could easily see a third-year quarterback, of his stature, where the moment maybe gets a little too big for him, and he makes some mistakes where he regresses back to old habits. And I wouldn't worry about the future of Josh Allen based off of this, but I would say. There is some concern about stuff like this cropping up in big moments that, you hope that with more experience he would overcome. But I mean, he obviously had a great year this year.
Yeah, and this was only his third year, and this was his first real big moment. So
Yeah, like last year when the Bills played the Texans in the postseason, that was like the Nickelodeon game or whatever. I know it wasn't actually on Nickelodeon, but it was like the ESPN
right.
throwaway playoff game.
Bill
And he did,
Simmons calls it the Shakey's game.
yeah, he did some really stupid crap in that one too that probably cost him the game. But
Yeah, but he was coming off of a so not that very good season.
Yeah,
he was a runner, and that was pretty
compelling,
much
yeah.
it. So he wasn't expected to do well. This playoffs was his first opportunity to to play well with high expectations, and he did so against the Ravens. He just didn't do so hot against the Chiefs.
Yeah, he didn't really do much against Baltimore.
I mean, I just want to say this: like, winning the Super Bowl is hard. I know Brady and Mahomes make it look so easy, but winning the Super Bowl is hard to do, and you can't just roll the ball out there and expect, oh, we're just going to go win the Super Bowl. So
yeah, that's why they're the GOAT and the GOAT kid, according to people, is the fact that you just pencil these dudes in pretty much every playoff game, even when you think you shouldn't, like we did this year, like where we kind of said, oh, we think the Saints should beat the Bucs. They didn't. We think the Packers should beat the Bucs, or at least Corey and I did. They didn't.
Can I just point out though, even though I got both of these wrong in last week's podcast, I got both of them right in the preseason when I picked the Bucs and the Chiefs to make it to the Super Bowl.
That is true. That is true. So
I believe I laughed at you for picking the Buccaneers. I thought that was absurd.
I think you laughed at me for that, and then you laughed at me again in week 1 when I picked them to lose to the Saints after I picked them to win to make it to the Super Bowl, and then I was right about the Saints beating them.
Well, I mean, what? It's not laughable to pick the Saints to beat the Buccaneers.
Well, no, but you laughed at me because you were like, wait a second, so you're taking a team that you think is going to win or make it to the Super Bowl to not win their first game of the season.
I mean, playing teams who lose games.
You laughed at me.
Well, I mean, some of your takes elicit that reaction.
The funny thing though is that most of my wilder takes end up coming true. It's the ones that I'm confident in that don't end up coming true. It's the things I just throw out there just to throw it out there that end up coming to fruition.
Yeah. I mean, this Buccaneers team, they had practice. All their football practice was on Zoom before their first game, basically, and now they're in the Super Bowl. That's insane.
That's what happens when you get Antonio Brown on your team.
Yeah, Antonio Brown. Oh, God. I'm rooting for the Chiefs now.
You see, I was kind of waffling on who I was going to root for, and then I watched the AFC Championship game, and the Chiefs were doing the stupid tomahawk chop, and I said, that's it, rooting for the Bucs. I refuse to root for anybody whose fans are grown-ass adults that do that. Just not going to happen. Sorry.
Chiefs fans demonstrated back also in week 1 that
yes,
sensitivity in terms of racial type of things isn't really their strong suit.
Nope, that was not great display either. So I'll get to some best and worst first before we get to some other NFL news. Our best quarterback of the week per Football Outsiders was Patrick Mahomes. No surprise there. He absolutely torched the Bills defense, which was pretty darn good. The worst on the other side was Josh Allen, who had a really rough game against the Chiefs, as we discussed. Best running back in total was T.J. Yeldon of the Bills, and our worst total running back was Aaron Jones. Now get ready for this twist. Our best rushing running back was Aaron Jones. And then our worst running back by just via rushing was Ronald Jones. But Aaron Jones did fumble twice on receptions.
Yep.
One of which was recovered and immediately turned into a touchdown.
So that was enough
Yeah, that was basically the game-sealing touchdown because the Packers didn't score enough points to top that point total.
And that was enough to take the best rushing running back and make him into the worst running back overall.
Well, and the rushing numbers for the week in general suck.
Yeah.
It was just awful. I think Jones led with 13 yards above replacement. And I'm like, that's your top runner for the week. It was not a very run-heavy weekend for
it was not.
Championship Sunday. So our best receiver was Tyreek Hill. Again, despite that early drop, he was unguardable for the Bills. And
for the Chiefs.
The Chiefs. The Bills could not guard him.
Yes.
The Chiefs were benefiting from that lack of ability to cover him. And the worst receiver was Gabriel Davis, who plays for the Bills, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dave. Yeah.
All right. Well, apparently he didn't have a very good week. Nobody on the Bills had a good week. So there you go.
Their kicker had a good week, didn't he? At least Shank one. He was busy.
He missed
missed an extra point.
Yep, he missed an extra point.
Well, everybody sucked for the Bills.
It was not a good weekend for the Bills, and sadly, we will miss out on our opportunity to see the Bills franchise have to do the final boss battle against their old nemesis, Tom Brady. I was kind of rooting for that. I was like, imagine if you're a Bills fan and this dude leaves the division and your team finally gets good and you go to a Super Bowl and you just have to face that guy again, and he probably is going to beat you and make you cry. So, but some other news that we've got, the Eagles hire, I just wrote down his last name, Sirianni. I don't even remember his first name. Who the hell is this guy? Who is he?
Some white guy. That's all you have to be. That's all. That's the only
Oh.
qualification you need to be a head coach in the NFL. You and I could get jobs if we really wanted to, Eric.
Sweet. I'd love to get paid $1 million.
I would qualify. I would fulfill the Rooney Rule. So,
So messed up.
I mean, again, that is the point we're making.
It is the point that we're making.
Meanwhile, Eric Bieniemy's just too busy just kicking ass and taking names, and he's got everybody's name already. But he can't get a job. But
Which is absurd, because
Sirianni.
the argument against Bieniemy is that Andy Reid calls the plays. Eric Bieniemy doesn't call the plays. Well, if that's gonna be your argument, why the Colts hire their guy who didn't call plays for his offense? Not the Colts. I forget who it was, but the Colts offensive coordinator was hired, and he didn't call plays for the Colts. Frank Reich was calling the plays.
Yeah, and why did Matt Nagy and Doug Peterson get hired as Chiefs coordinators under Andy Reid if they didn't call the plays? So, there's always good questions. But so there's some interesting stories around Nick Sirianni and how he got hired, and he was on vacation apparently. And the Eagles called for his job interview, presumably over Zoom or some type of medium like that, like Skype or whatever.
And he didn't have a suit, so what did the Eagles executives do?
They decided, since they knew that he didn't have a suit, that they were going to dress casually to make him more comfortable for the interview.
Because that's totally how, businesses are supposed to operate. You're supposed to cater to the person that you're interviewing and trying to find out if he is fit to lead your organization.
Yeah, well, the thing is, honestly, that part of the story isn't what caught my eye. The fact that the dude who is being interviewed to be a head coach of a National Football League team was on vacation, which tells you he had zero reason to believe he was getting a call. Like, this dude himself was thinking, I'm not getting a head coaching gig. I might as well just take a week off and go on vacation. Any other coach that was expecting some level of interest or even an interview would have said, I'm going to hold off until the coaching cycle hiring is done. Now, this guy was like, no way, I'm getting hired. And then the Eagles like, hey, buddy, let's give you a job. And it's like,
there's so much that is laughable in the absolutely most depressing way possible about this hiring. What are you doing, Philadelphia? Like, it's just like, this hiring makes me legitimately mad. Like, I have to laugh just to keep from steam pouring out of my ears.
Yeah, this is absurd. And I was thinking about this past week, your boy Cliff Kingsbury, how he got hired.
It's my boy.
After getting fired at Texas Tech. And
His
the
alma
reason
mater.
they hired him, they're like, well, he coached Patrick Mahomes, so obviously you want that guy. Well, they don't, but they're not hiring the guy who's actively coaching Patrick Mahomes.
And I think Eric said it best on our chat in the past week or so when he was like, this guy coached Patrick Mahomes into being drafted after Mitchell Trubisky.
Yes, after Mitchell Trubisky, who sucked in college, except against Georgia Tech.
I mean,
this happens exclusively to you.
Yeah.
Yep, Russell
Just my
Wilson.
school gets lit up by these guys who aren't any good.
Yeah, some guy named Russell Wilson with the Wolfpack lit you guys
Oh my
up.
God. I think he just scored again. It's like 150 to 10.
Yep. Yeah, this is, I guess, the logic and reasoning behind it, which is non-existent, is that I guess
logic.
Sirianni worked with Carson Wentz when Frank Reich was in Philly, and so I guess they're hoping that he's some type of Carson Wentz whisperer or some nonsense
So basically,
like that.
this is guaranteeing that they're going to keep Carson Wentz and not start Jalen Hurts next year.
I could not tell you, but what I know is that you hiring some nondescript white dude to be your coach in order to appease your disgustingly bad white quarterback is beyond comprehensible to me. It's baffling. You had the worst, most embarrassing quarterback in the NFL, and instead of saying, "Gee, maybe we should move on from this guy. He's a bum and a head case," you say, "Oh no, we've got to help him by giving him somebody that he likes as coach."
Well, as a Washington fan, I am all for this decision. As a human being, this is ridiculous.
As a frustrated individual that wants to see the NFL thrive and be the best it can be,
You want to see the best coaches.
Well short.
You don't want to see any team have a crummy coach. You want every team to have a really good coach so that every game is competitive.
You know who's playing the game right though. You got to give him props is Raheem Morris because he decided he was going to go be the defensive coordinator for the Rams. Because anybody that shares the same airspace as Sean McVay gets a job, regardless of how qualified they are.
Well, I guess
even if it's just hanging out at the bar.
I guess we'll find out if that applies to people who don't look like Sean McVay.
But there's also something to be said about the owners don't care about this. Clearly, they don't care about fixing the inequities in the hiring process for minority coaching candidates. But the indication is that the commissioner does. Roger Goodell wants this fixed. And the best way that minority coaching hires happen or have in the past, and it's unfortunate that it comes to this, is that they have head coaches that are already established that champion black coaches. Bill Walsh did so. Some other Andy Reid has in the past as well. And so
Bruce Arians has at least seemed to try to do that.
Yeah, and hell, Dan Campbell freaking hired an entire staff of black coaches, which is unfortunate because he's going to be a disaster, and all those guys are going to go down with the ship, and they're not going to get a fair shake. But I mean, at least he's trying. I mean, that's kind of what it's come down to. Is like usually the response to why aren't there more black head coaches is because there aren't a whole lot of black coordinators. It's like, well, why aren't there a whole lot of black coordinators? Because the coaches don't hire them. So the ones that do, usually they end up succeeding if the coach is successful too. So there is something to be said for being somebody that helps move the ball forward and down the field with regards to that. And I think that McVay could be that guy. I mean, he clearly has the influence over the NFL. Frankly, whether it's deserved or not remains to be seen. He's been a good coach, but he ain't that special. But hey, if he can use his position and his obvious influence to do something good, why not?
My question is, what should the NFL do to fix this problem? Because I don't even think they're doing enough to acknowledge that it is a problem, to be honest. So, what should the NFL do to fix this? Do they need to be proactive and hands-on and say, well, if the league has 32 teams, we need to have 8 of the head coaches have to be minorities or something like that. That would fix it.
But how do you
best way to go about it?
How do you implement something like that? Do you say, well, you 3 teams have to hire a black coach like that? I don't think that
when the Lions fired Dan Campbell, Dan Campbell, when they fire him in 15 minutes, you have to hire a person of color. Just declare that.
I just don't know that that necessarily fixes the issue. It addresses the issue. I don't think that fixes it at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the issue with that is that the entire purpose is to get minority coaches their fair shake at opportunities. And when you forcibly require a certain number like that, it creates a resentment, which means that you're going to have a ton of resistance to that, and it's going to be a mess. And the big issue, again, is the people that control this are the owners, and the owners are the guys that don't care.
Yeah.
Like it starts with them because they're really the ones that oversee the hiring process, or sometimes are directly involved in it because, usually a GM hires the coach.
That makes sense.
But sometimes the owner can give a yes or no, or just hires the coach himself. So it's tough to really say, how do you address this, because you're trying to address, some form of systemic racism with the most racist group of people in existence, old white guys. Let's be honest. Like, generally speaking, if you're looking at who's racist in America, it's usually going to lean towards older, whiter men. And that's who runs the NFL.
Yep.
Well, there you go. So, I mean, the thing is, I don't feel like Goodell, what can he actually do? Because the owners are his bosses. Like, he's at the end of the day, he's not in charge.
Yep.
The owners sign his check. So,
yeah, you need more owner support, and I don't know how much there really is for that. I mean, I'm sure some of them are. I'm not suggesting that every single owner is racist or anything like that. I'm not even suggesting that, even half of them are, but right. They all have biases. And that's the thing. It's like a lot of times people don't understand that we're not saying that, the owners look at coaching candidates and say, oh, no, you can't hire him, he's black. That's not what happens most of the time. It's more about the coach is the face of your franchise. And a lot of times an owner wants a hands-on part in making that decision. And so a lot of times they're going to look at guys and they want to connect with them to make sure they're on the quote-unquote same page. And a lot of older people and a lot of white people have a hard time connecting with black men. And so it creates a situation where, because of that bias, because of that disconnect, that they decide to say something like, I don't really think he's the man for the job. He doesn't have the temperament. He doesn't have this, that, or the other, when he very well could. And whereas they see a guy that goes in there like Dan Campbell and talks about gnawing off kneecaps and other weird stuff. And,
it's a 6-year deal.
But they look at him and they say some stuff like, he reminds me of my son. That type of crap happens.
Is that what you want?
That's frightening.
But it's frightening, but it's true though. Like, think about it. If you're an 80-year-old white dude, you probably have kids, and your kids are probably the same age as most NFL coaching candidates. And so a lot of times these guys like, oh, I see a lot in my son in that guy. Well, they're not going to say that about a black coach, because they're not going to be able to say, oh, yeah, that he reminds me of my son. Well, he can't because he's black. So a lot of times they see him as something other, even if it's not, at the front of their mind. It's still there. It's still something that holds them back from making that call.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got one more mailbag question from Andrew. It relates to the Washington football team and their quarterback situation. The question is, what do you think Washington is going to do about their quarterback situation? And he follows up with, could Matthew Stafford be a possibility? I would like to think so, because I think Matt Stafford's a good quarterback, and I think that he's stuck on a crummy Lions team that has kind of suppressed his value, because he could be an influence on a team that's ready to go to make playoff runs. And I think that Washington, at the very least, has the defense to do so. The offense obviously would need some additional retooling. The offensive line needs to be a little bit better, and they could use a little bit more as far as receiving options. But, we saw in the playoff game against the Buccaneers, good quarterback play can work with the Washington offense. And Taylor Heineke is probably not a good quarterback, but he played like a good quarterback for 60 minutes against Tampa Bay. And Matt Stafford is certainly good enough to play like a good quarterback for 16 games in Washington, which means that I think he would make them a really pretty darn good team.
Yeah, I mean,
I agree. Go ahead.
I would love to see Heineke, play well and be the starter and whatnot. I mean, because he also looked really good when he came in for Haskins in, I guess it was week 16.
Yeah, they were playing Carolina. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was too late. It was way too late for him to actually make any difference. But he looked really good in that game, And I remember wondering, like, should we just roll with him if, because clearly Alex Smith was not able to actually move around in the pocket. Like, he was just too banged up. It just wasn't, he wasn't going to be very effective. And I remember thinking, like, maybe we should just go with him and see what we have here. And then we got that opportunity in the playoffs, and he played really well. But again, like you've said, Eric, it was one game, and that certainly doesn't mean anything, especially when we're talking about a guy who's had multiple shots in the NFL and has not cashed in on any of them. You have to assume that more likely that was an aberration than an indication that he's actually a really good player who's been hiding in a bad player's body for the past 4 years. Stafford is a really good player. He's younger than a lot of people realize. Like, he's younger than I often realize. He's still in his early 30s. He's 31, 32. Like, he could still have a good bit of football left in him. I am concerned about
people in their early 30s, Corey.
What's that?
You got a problem with people in their early 30s?
No, I'm about to join them in a year.
Oh. Just making sure.
So I better not. He could still have a good bit of good football left in him. I am a little bit concerned about his durability because he has been banged up at the end of the season for the last 3 years. But he's played well. And if we can put a good offensive line in front of him, if we can build up the receiving core, if we can keep, Antonio Gibson, if we can keep our defense together, that's a playoff team with Matthew Stafford under
They're
center.
A playoff team this year.
This year, yeah.
But I mean, like, a legit playoff team, even if the NFC East doesn't suck ass. Like, that's a legitimate playoff team at that point.
Washington, as long as if Dallas doesn't re-sign Dak Prescott for whatever baffling reason, Washington is easily the best team in this division.
I would imagine that Dallas is going to re-sign Dak Prescott. I would be a little bit surprised if they didn't. But the kind of the point of all that, though, is that if Washington wants him, they're going to have to move quickly because everything that's floating around is saying that he's likely to be moved before the Super Bowl.
Oh yeah. Well, I agree that Stafford is a possibility in Washington, but he's a possibility in a whole bunch of other places too that need quarterbacks. Like the whole quarterback situation in the NFL is about to completely turn on its head in the next couple of months. Like, if we thought it was crazy that Tom Brady left the Patriots to go to the Buccaneers,
and Phillip Rivers left the Chargers to go to the Colts. I mean, we had quite a few moves last year, but this year might actually top that.
Oh yeah,
because Phillip Rivers retired, so there's a vacancy in Indianapolis. You've got potentially Aaron Rodgers might be on the move. You've got
you got Matthew Stafford. You got Deshaun Watson, who wants the hell out.
Yeah.
Jimmy G's going somewhere apparently.
Jimmy G, the 49ers seem to be ready to be done with him.
The Rams hate Jared Goff now.
Yeah, they do. They are hating on him in the media. Like, even Sean McVay is basically like, yeah, he's the quarterback for now.
And he's the quarterback this week. So we don't have any game this week.
Quarterback today, this hour.
Yeah, as of this moment, and I think that's what the GM said. He said, as of this moment, and then he basically said the cap situation is tough, but we can make it work. Anybody can be moved. So basically, yeah, we're looking into getting rid of this guy. And Goff is good enough to start. So, he's absolutely good enough. And so is Jimmy Garoppolo, I think. I think he's a good enough player to start somewhere. I don't know how good he is, but certainly he's a starting caliber quarterback. And I think there's somebody else that was thrown in the mix too. And then, of course, you've got what's going on with New Orleans with Drew Brees presumably retiring and Jameis Winston being a potential somebody could be interested in him, maybe not. So who knows about that? All this good stuff going on. You got Carson Wentz.
New York teams. They need quarterbacks too.
Yeah, Sam Darnold's probably going to be cut loose. I mean, although we don't really know. Somebody said, Sam Darnold, we want to give him another shot. I'm like, okay, go ahead.
And then we got to figure out what's going to happen with Tua in Miami.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, if Deshaun Watson is traded to Miami, obviously Tua would presumably go play for the Texans, which would be devastating for him. I mean, that's just unfair. But, it's going to be fun. That's part of the fun. It's one beautiful mystery, to quote a quarterback from the NFL who currently plays in Green Bay, but maybe not much longer.
You know whose job is safe? Drew Lock. He is locked in.
Drew locked in. All right.
You know what the insane thing is that of all 32 quarterbacks, you would have to probably rank Tom Brady, the 43-year-old, as somebody in the upper half in terms of job security.
Oh, like he's in the upper eighth in job security.
Like he's not going anywhere. And also, the Falcons might want to move on from Matt Ryan.
Yeah, that's true.
Like these are all on the table, and I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun offseason.
I feel like at the end of the day, though, like it's a zero-sum game. Like there's everybody's leaving somewhere to go somewhere. But like if you keep shuffling everybody around, like how much is everybody improving as a whole? You know what I mean? Like, you know, you could just keep moving these people, but like, you know, if they weren't that good in their first place, how much are they going to be better after they move on?
Well, it's just really interesting to see where the actual good quarterbacks end up, because that's going to create new contenders. Like, I mean, Deshaun Watson on the right team could be a Super Bowl team.
Yeah.
Same thing. Yeah. Obviously, same thing with Aaron Rodgers or even Matt Stafford, depending on where he lands. I mean, if Matt Stafford went to, say, the 49ers and they got healthy, that's a dangerous team.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know, there are
the Super Bowl.
Yeah, there are options like that around the league. So we will see what we will see. But, you know, we got to get through the Super Bowl first for at least some of it, because apparently Stafford's going to be moved before then. But, again, we don't really know what to expect there.
Yeah, but like if Stafford goes to the Jets, for example, that doesn't move the needle at all.
No, that's just
more of the same.
That just takes the Lions going from being an abysmal franchise with a good quarterback and moves the Jets to being an abysmal franchise with a good quarterback, and it just turns the Lions into the Jets.
I mean, it's basically you just need to adjust the color on your TV, right?
Yep.
There's no difference there.
Yep. All right, so that brings us to the end of our discussion points, I believe. Let me just double check, make sure.
Drew asked if Aaron Rodgers is staying in Green Bay. I say no. I think he's gone.
I think he stays in Green Bay.
I think he's gone.
Yeah, I think he's gone too.
Unless he's the one calling the shot and he's the one who wants out, like Deshaun Watson wants out of Houston, I think that he's staying. I don't think that Green Bay is going to move him because they want to.
They do want to. They drafted his replacement.
And they didn't play him at all. They do not want to start Jordan Love.
Yeah, but they also don't want to admit to having egg on their face, like saying we drafted this guy in the first round, but we already know he sucks.
So instead, they'd like to smear egg on their face by making a dumb move. Got it.
Well, they already have the egg on their face. Whether they're willing to acknowledge it is another thing. So
right.
But we will see there. I mean, that is, again, it's crazy that we've got so many really good quarterbacks that are on the move. You expect bad or mediocre quarterbacks to be shipped out of town, but these are
Cousins.
I think he's staying in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Isn't he? I thought he only signed a 3-year deal.
But he signed an extension before the season.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
So he's got another. I think he got 2 more years on top of that one. So he's in Minnesota for another 3 years contract wise. So.
Oh goodness. Okay.
I am looking forward to next week's show because we'll get to make our game picks. Quick reminder to everybody that it'll be your winner and a margin of victory that you pick, and your confidence points that you earn will be based on whether you were right and the difference between the actual margin of victory and your predicted one. And I'm also looking forward to Eric. Are you and I going to do a round 2 of those side bets?
Yeah, sure. Prop bets.
We'll find some prop bets and go through those on the show next week and make some little $5 bets on the side.
Unfortunately, we won't be able to watch
together.
the Super Bowl together, but
we'll be watching at the same time. Sure. We'll be talking in the chats.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
We could get on Skype and talk about it.
Yeah, that's always an option too. So that'll do it for our show. That's all the talking points. Do you guys have any shout outs or anything like that?
Well, we did neglect to mention and this will be the only time we mention this, the Buccaneers are the first team ever to play a home game in the Super Bowl.
Yep. Yep.
So that's kind of
everybody
cool.
loves to just show how smart they are and bring up the Rams playing in the Rose Bowl and the Super Bowl, but that's not a home game, so you don't need to show off your knowledge like I'm doing right now.
49ers played at Stanford.
Yeah, they played at Stanford. Yeah, because Candlestick was a dump and didn't have enough seats or something like that.
Yep.
But Stanford Stadium was a dump too.
I don't know, man. That's just what happened. I mean, it's a bizarre situation. So I have a shout out. I actually have a couple. One to Sekou Smith, who worked for TNT as a basketball analyst. He passed away I think he was only 49 years old due to the coronavirus. Smith was one of the prominent figures in NBA coverage and also one of the great guys to be a part of, sports broadcasting and things like that. And he'll be deeply missed around sports and around the country because, I mean, again, world-class individual. So rest in peace. It's a devastating loss for the NBA. And also, yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the passing of Kobe Bryant.
Yep.
I'm sure you guys saw that. And so, it's been a surreal year for a lot of reasons. Between that really kind of got it started with, just that tragic, devastating news. And, just the time has gone by so fast because of all the other crap that's happened. But, I feel like additional time to honor Kobe is always warranted because of how big of a star he was and how big of an impact he had across sports as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so that wraps up our show. Thank you for tuning in. This was episode 128 of the Sportsballers podcast. You can email us at thesportsballers@gmail.com to send in mailbags for shows. Give us any type of feedback, positive, negative, or something in between. You can find us on pretty much all of the major resources to listen to podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon. And if you have another way that you found us or have a better way that you prefer to hear us, let us know that as well. You can follow us on Twitter as well at SportsBallers18, or you can follow us individually. Corey is at Corey Puffett. I am at Quagmire67, and Evan is at Evan_Ash13. Thank you guys for tuning in. We will see you guys next week. So take it easy and enjoy the non-Pro Bowl week. Have a good one.